G'day and welcome back to the bite-sized Bhagavad Gita. My name is Sadhu. This is the second episode, although we'll be examining chapter 1, Observation of the Armies. Now, the chapter 2 is the contents of the Bhagavad Gita summarized, but in order to not actually summarize the whole Bhagavad Gita in the first chapter, because it's very easy to do, I shall limit myself on the kind of explanations that I'll give, and I'll try to stick as close as possible to the Mahabharata and the cultural context of which this amazing piece of poetry, Song of God, emerged out there in the field. I'll strive to address the opposing army in terms of what it was that Arjuna's seen, for the sake of him having actually thrown his bow onto the ground and beads of sweat rolling upon his face. His kingdom was before him. This is the future of his kingdom. In fact, the grace of Krishna would further explain why yoga was necessary from a physiological point of view, how much shaking and stuff like that he had as a warrior, and also the necessary mental orientation. That eventually got Arjuna up and fighting, and his sharpened arrows could pierce the illusion of materiality and the kind of false structures that he was resting upon. So chapter 1 is really the lead up into the main show, if we may say such a thing. It's not like a dress rehearsal, it's almost like the build up towards this is how it took place in Kurukshetra, which is an actual place in northern India to this very day. The Kurukshetra and the Dharmakshetra are very similar things. You see, the Kurukshetra is the physical place, the Dharmakshetra is like the field by which this scenario could apply to one's own life, okay? And in it, there are a few descriptions, depending on your edition of Bhagavad Gita, a few descriptions of the dynastic history, the kind of kingdoms that was before him, and also, you know, it's the observation of the army, and Krishna is constantly teasing, like, this is the army, this is your enemy, this is your enemy. And there's this kind of thing that the Bhagavad Gita begins with. You see, it could only be the preservation of the family unit that stood for correct morals, right? That is like an incubating, capsule of the right values. But not only the right values like goodness and stuff like that, but these kind of transcendental values that aren't usually maintained, since they don't yield things like immediate comfort and material reimbursement. It's like, this is the warrior class, right? This is the people who are called the Kshatriyas. They're actually out there on the field, you know, we're like standing shoulder to shoulder, each fighting our own war, each perfecting our own craft. And this is what Krishna came to see. For Arjuna's sake, he wanted that to be known, for the sake of, well, I think really to show, you know, this is what life is. And the fact that this has been preserved for so long goes to show that it's the only moment that ever truly existed, and it could be understood as the shimmering light of Krishna himself. So yeah, it's pretty much like the first 10 sutras describing the relatives, the fact that his family was there, and there's his grandfather, his teacher, his guru, his brothers and sisters, all on the opposing side of the wall, of the kreshta, of the field, okay? And Arjuna asked Krishna, take me straight to the middle of the field. I want to see what's going on here. And so Krishna did. He took him all the way right into the center. He was his driver, And Arjuna was a strong warrior from the Kshatriya class, well educated, very wealthy, and my goodness, with the great good fortune to know Krishna. First cousins of Krishna. He was a dancer, an amazing warrior in the way that he could actually shoot arrows from both arms. Painter, poet, scholar. He's like getting this from Krishna, And so Krishna drove him right there with the Hanuman flag blowing in the wind, and alas, the trumpets sounded, the horns started to rise, and the drums are beating, and Arjuna's looking at Krishna, and Krishna's looking at Arjuna, and his heart's beating, and his eyes are dials are pupillating, pupils are dilating, and it's like, holy shit, this is what it's going on. I cannot do this. I cannot fight my family and friends. Even if I was to win the war somehow, what good would it be to inherit a kingdom? Well, what good would it be to inherit a kingdom if no one would be around to witness it with me? And the material greed and ignorance, little did Arjuna know, was actually him as well. Okay, he actually had caught some of this, I wouldn't say disease, but ignorance. If I think it's a disease, ignorance is probably the only disease. So then what happened? Well, out of false compassion, okay, it's false compassion actually that Arjuna was striving to flee to the forest to get rid of every burden to carry, to get rid of the potential future that he had not a good feeling about. So he wanted to flee, and in fleeing, it would have been sweet, he could have renounced everything and just chilled out, and how it was in India. This is like a Vedic paradise where he could just meditate and chant the names and study the Vedas and become enlightened and live off berries in the forest, and people have done this, people before him like Ram and many sages to this very day, believe me, have been there. It's taken place. But the compassion was false, okay? It seems like it's real when it starts. It seems like it's the right thing to do, everybody's just doing it wrong. I can't even get involved with that because they're trying their best. You see, it's false compassion, and Krishna points out why. It's actually a spiritual laziness, okay? It's one of the gunas that was getting him, which I'll explain actually in chapter 9 or so. Pretty sure it's chapter 9. Yes, it's a false renunciation, okay? It's a laziness, because the identification that Arjuna had placed upon his friends and relatives was not a transcendental identification. It was a recognition of the body. It's like, oh yeah, that's so and so because of their greatness, and this is the opposing enemy. That transcendental quality he had to recognize and see in everybody, and live in that living fire, right? So what I sort of come to see how surrender unto me the Bhagavad Gita is talking about, they're actually representations of what Arjuna could have strived for. The mightiness of these friends and relatives who it is assumed in his false materialistic point of view he couldn't actually attain himself, due to perhaps thinking that it would run out, that the wealth would become lost, that there would be no sustenance. And Krishna This is when Arjuna surrenders, and he was just perplexed, and later on Krishna clarifies it straight away, and that's why it's just like a lead up to the main show. It's just like this is what's going on, like if you want to stand for something, you got to stand for something. Reading the Bhagavad Gita can show you how to fight the good war. And it's timeless, and it breaks down all boundaries, and it is relevant to this very day in the macrocosmic scale, right inside the mind, trying to decide what's good and bad. That no family in particular can hold this, no culture can claim it as their own. It's transcendental. Everyone must be killed. There is a righteous reason for the sake of preserving transcendental qualities, the good value, the eternal Dharma. Krishna comes back time and time again in many different forms to explain this. Let's check out the rest of my notes here. Yeah, so I've written in real shorthand, Arjuna decides to call it quits. And Krishna comes along, like the halftime Hollywood basketball coach who gives like a really good talk, like, you can do it, come on, think of all the fame and fortune that could be ahead if you maintain the integrity and stand up for what's right. And look at all the ignorance and greed that's going on, and imagine the women who have been all maintaining this kind of ignorance that's pervasive in these kind of cultures. And Krishna said, no, man, he faced despondency when I was just like, I can't get out of this situation. I can't see a brightness in the situation, and I have no means to get from A to B. I can't improve myself. I can't improve out there. And boom, that's when that magical moment hit. He said, Krishna, I have to surrender. Please show me what I need to know. And that's just an amazing point in history, whether or not it happened in real life, whatever, that such a moment could take place. It's like Moses seeing the burning bush, and he could speak in tongue. It's just an amazing flash of insight that, like, this is the turning point when we move out of identification as people in cultures and families, and we become like worldly people. We become like our army is extending, and we're fighting the good fight. And if it wasn't for Arjuna in particular, who came to this very point and saw the coincidentia oppositorum, this, to use a nice Latin term, this strange paradox of, well, I can't kill them because I love them. Krishna is saying, no, you think you love them, but what you love actually isn't sturdy, isn't stable. Never has there been a time when I don't exist, nor you, nor any of these kings. And really, it was Krishna who, pre-Buddha, spun the wheel of Dharma, spun the teachings of karma. I've written here another perspective, because I like to give different perspectives. It can broaden your understanding of the Gita. I've had a beautiful lecturer mention that it should be read 3 times. Firstly as Krishna yourself, secondly as Arjuna, thirdly as you teaching Arjuna. Like an introduction, then firstly you teaching Arjuna and Arjuna learning from Krishna. Either way, it's all similar in a way. Krishna is like the devil for when Christ was in the desert to Arjuna. Instead, this time everyone came to Arjuna, and like Christ was just like, I'm in the desert 40 days later, that's okay. I've got this, And Krishna's like, all right, you think you got that? Well, everyone's going to come to you, and now you got to do it yourself. And Krishna was like, but you can come this way. You can move inward and find the spaciousness and the answer and the peace there. Yeah, so we have the physiological symptoms of despondency: the sweating, the trembling, the shaking at the knees. This is the symptoms of someone who's not settled. Someone's not at peace. It's like that hurry, rapid, rushy kind of nature that you see all over the TV, and that It's operating from the false, fearful body perspective. This is why yoga began to be taught. Also, from the intuitive point of view, there's the yoga of understanding in the intellectual way, amongst the type of working of yoga. That's different approaches to why the yoga was given to Krishna, from Krishna to Arjuna. Yeah, so that's it really. That's enough for now. Okay, it's just an observation of the armies. It's really just like the folding of the hands and the turning into the breath, into the meditation. And you can observe the armies every morning, every evening, they're there. So is Krishna. So is the inevitability of equilibrium. It's just a matter of tuning in and seeing what really is, and that gracious understanding of the way to treat oneself towards dealing with illusion, and yet at the same time not renouncing it all, not just saying it's all too much. And right in the middle there they were on the chariots of fire, drums beaten, horns blasting, Hanuman flag and blowing in the breeze, and it's like, and they're off. So that's chapter 1, observation of the armies. We'll be back at chapter 2, contents of the Gita summarized. This is pretty much like a historical background kind of explanation of the Gita, which is nevertheless important. The dynasties, the Pandavas and the Kurus, they were constantly clashing, and I think there's much more talk about them from the rest of the Mahabharata. Hari Om Tat Sat. Thank you for tuning in.